Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Cargo Cafe. As always, I'm your host, Libby Hausman. I'm an account manager and the marketing coordinator here at Best Way International. And today I'm joined with Riley Wiles. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Riley Wiles, managing partner, corporate development. I will just be here for color commentary.
Perfect. Exactly what we wanted you here for. We're super excited for today's episode. We have a lot to talk about with new updates coming hourly on the new trade and tariff policies coming from the new administration. We have two incredibly qualified speakers coming soon. We have Chance Pope and Jack McDonough. Before we dive into that, we did want to give a special shout out to an amazing local organization that we have been partnered with here at Best Way International, and that is Literacy KC. Literacy KC is an incredible organization that is based out of Kansas City that focuses on literacy for all through direct services, advocacy, and collaboration. Literacy KC offers a welcoming community for adults and families to improve their literacy skills and enhance their quality of life. We recently were able to sponsor and attend their 80s themed trivia night. We had a table together for Best Way people who were able to go and support. They had a great time, and the event was able to raise over $40,000 for Literacy KC. So we're just really honored to be a part of that organization. We'll leave some information and a link to their website in the comments if anyone wants to check it out. They are a great local organization that's doing really good work. And our team had a great time at their trivia night. We had some really great costumes. If you want to check out our LinkedIn, I think we have some pictures from that too. Nice 80s representation from the Best Way team for sure.
Yeah, I was bummed I couldn't make that. I have just amazing 80s gear. So that was right in my wheelhouse. I was pretty bummed I couldn't make that
just
one.
Sitting in your closet ready to go.
Yes, I'm an 80s guy. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that we were able to take home the grand prize for trivia, but always an honor to participate, and it all goes towards a good cause.
We're missing our leader, Jay. He would have crushed 80s trivia.
I know. We have the perfect person for it, and he couldn't make it to that one. But please check out Literacy KC. As I mentioned, I'll put their information down below at the end and send out some links. It's a great local organization. We're just really happy that we've been able to be a part of that. Before we hand this over to Chance and Jack to get into the nitty-gritties of the trade and tariff changes, I wanted to actually talk to Riley a little bit about his thoughts on the current trade environment from the point of view as a domestic shipper, because most of what we're talking about today is going to be from the point of view as international shippers, as they are most directly affected. But as we all here know today, it's all kind of interconnected. So Riley, kind of what are your thoughts on this whole situation as a domestic guy?
Yeah, well, the trucking industry has been in a state of recession for the last couple of years. And we finally started to see some stability, some recovery, and some predictability on that. And then comes January 2025. And all of these things can throw that off course and our hope for recovery on the trucking side. So just looking for some things that these guys have to say today that we can be on the keep an eye out for, and just see how that's going to impact our recovery state that we're in right now.
Yeah, I think that's going to be really interesting. Something that I've learned a lot just working with Best Way is the way everything is all interconnected. Mm-hmm. Even if you're a domestic shipper that doesn't deal at all with importing or exporting anything to do with other countries, it all has a trickle-down effect. And that's something we'll touch on a little bit throughout our presentation, but I wanted to just kind of get your thoughts up top. So appreciate that insight for sure.
Yeah, I'm going to listen to these smart guys and see how that's going to impact me. That's my goal today.
We're kind of here for commentary, and we have much smarter people to actually present information. So as always, if you have questions, please leave them in the chat. We'll try to answer them as we go along. I got a lot of great questions from people before that we're going to touch on. But if anything comes up as Jack and Chance are presenting, please just leave your comments down below, and we'll be sure to get to those. So we know that you didn't come here to listen to Riley and I talk, so I'm going to go ahead and bring out Chance and Jack. I'll let them introduce themselves, and we'll go ahead and get started. So here we have Chance and Jack. As mentioned, I'll let them introduce themselves and put Riley on mute. So here we go.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Thanks for the strong intro, Libby and Riley. That was hopefully we can deliver on the smart talk you let us in on. So I'm Jack. A lot of you guys know me, especially if you attended our Cargo Cafe 3 weeks ago. Feels like 3 years ago, considering the amount of things that have changed since that. But I'm a vice president here at Bestway International. I have a background in leading our import department. And so a lot of the changes that have occurred in the past couple of weeks have been right in the wheelhouse of what our customers expect from our organization. So glad to be back on here talking to you guys about it. Again, now that we have a little bit more information about kind of how things have proceeded.
And I'm Chance, Senior Director, International Business Development. I've been with Bestway only since July. Some of you may have attended one of our previous cargo cafes where I did a deep dive into one of the Incoterms DDP. Really happy to be here and excited to chat about this. It's been a revolving situation, and we've had to change on the fly a couple times, but we're really glad that the timing has worked out. We already had this planned and scheduled, and we know that it's very important for our customers and very timely. So really happy to be here.
Yeah, and Chance just presented yesterday to the ITC here in Kansas City on a very similar topic. So he's very fresh. I like to believe I'm very fresh on this topic as well. Anybody that's been kind of following along this week has been, had their eyes glued to the computer screen or their phone to look for the most up-to-date information. So hoping to bring that to you guys today in one place and see if we can get you guys as literate as possible on where we're at and where we're headed.
Yeah, that sounds great. Well, we'll go ahead and dive into it. We're going to start just going over a brief recap of what we talked about on our last Cargo Cafe. So I'll let Jack get into that.
Yeah, so a lot of you guys were here 3 weeks ago, and we kind of put this on ahead of the election to kind of go over what was being talked about either by President Trump or by his administration leading up to the election, trying to parse out what we thought was something that was legitimately either possible or something that was really a part of his first 90-day initiative. Obviously, the heavy hitters right off the bat were the big four: China, Canada, Mexico, and the EU. Very clearly, we've seen action on 3 of those, only one of them having gone through, with China receiving a 10% duty increase on all of their products across the board. Really only left off the table so far in terms of actual executive orders has been the European Union. But considering some of the rhetoric that's come out of the administration when discussing the tariffs on China, Canada, and Mexico regarding the European Union, I think it's safe to say that their time's coming. When that will be is to be determined, but it's certainly still on the table and not exempt from future action here.
I think he's mentioned something about February 18th in some social media posts. So whether that comes true or not, that date has been floated out there.
Yep. We talked about kind of the differences that separate 2018 tariffs, the first round of Trump tariffs, versus present day 2025, specifically regarding whether the tariffs would be more transitory or permanent. Basically what existed in 2018 stuck. Now, there were other tariff threats on Canada and Mexico in 2019, I believe, that didn't end up sticking, very similar to kind of what had happened earlier this week, where they were implemented, but before actually going into effect, kind of taken off the table. But really what our conversation centered around a couple weeks ago was, are the tariffs on China and the rest of the world going to be a permanent kind of tide shift, or is it going to be used as more of a negotiating tactic or a political weapon for other countries around the world to see what they've done? And we've seen mixed results of that. We're going to talk about that later in the slide in terms of the size of the countries that are being threatened with these tariffs and kind of the results that came out of those. So I think we've learned quite a bit about kind of how those how trade is being viewed by the administration in terms of what they hope to get out of it. And then I really think kind of the conversation for right now remains, how do we prepare if we don't know what's happening tomorrow? How do we prepare for what's happening, 6 months from now, a year from now, 4 years from now? And that's really what I think Chance and I are going to talk about right off the bat here is the best ways to do that. So really what I preached the first go around was diversification. That's easier for some lines of business or companies than it is for others. And so I'm not, obtuse to the fact that it's not always possible, but being able to explore other avenues of trade. If you're heavily dependent on a supplier in China, is there somebody in Thailand that can, make a percentage of your goods there so that you're not, completely underwater if something occurs, or even looking at potentially the other side of the world or domestic manufacturing. Chance, what else do you see in your world that can help our customers and vendors prepare?
Yeah, diversification obviously is point number one. But some things to think about when you're thinking about how do I diversify, where do I diversify, where is price elasticity, right? How impacted is your product with these tariffs in place? How long can you hold out before you need to raise the prices to your customer? As we know, a lot of the end user price is not just dictated by the cost of goods that are received, right? Distribution, fulfillment, there's all kinds of different costs that impact the end price. And so just understanding exactly how impacted your product is and how long you can last before you need to raise prices. Because as we saw, these things aren't necessarily they may not last very long. And so you want to make sure you're not reacting, overreacting. And at the same time, you just have to understand what the implications are if it is a long lasting thing. One specific thing sorry, Jack, go ahead.
I was going to say, just to that price elasticity point, I've talked to a number of our clients who've kind of put clauses into their product catalogs for 2025 and beyond. Basically, hey, these prices are subject to change if the trade environment or tariff, even as specifically as mentioning tariffs, changes kind of our cost of goods sold. So, that legalese, it can go that far for you guys.
Absolutely. And something to be, an immediate thing we are recommending is review your customs bond amount. If you're importing from any of these three countries, or even the EU, since there's already been stated plans to put something in place, understand your customs bond amount, and because that is one thing that will immediately need to be addressed, because if you're importing from these countries.
Yep. I think one more call out, just commit to being flexible. A lot of these aren't going to have super long, lead times in terms of us even knowing that a tariff exists. And then similarly, you're not really going to have a whole lot of time between when you know about it and versus when it's taken off the board, like we saw with Canada and Mexico earlier this week. So very important that you guys commit to flexibility as a kind of a core competency over the next couple of years to make sure that you're not reacting as much as you are being proactive.
Yeah, I think that's great stuff. Apologies, we had a little bit of a technical glitch here, but we seem to be back up and running, so we'll just keep trucking through. I did notice, Jack, when you were talking about how to prepare, you did say, here are the best ways to prepare, and I'm going to assume the pun was fully intended.
Always intended.
I think it was great. All right.
So the presidential actions that we've seen, aside from the tariffs that were, or the executive orders that were announced over the weekend and then modified and all of that, President Trump issued an America First trade policy, and this document and policy, essentially he is asking all of the U.S. organizations, government organizations, to review trade policies. How are they impacting us? Are there any inefficiencies? Are there any imbalances? And then to make suggestions and bring ideas on how to counteract any imbalances or unfairness. So this review is touching every agency, and there's reviews of previous policy that has been put in place, and there's a lot of moving parts here, but essentially nothing is off the table. So if an agency comes back with an idea, they're going to look at it and see if it's possible, if it's feasible, and if it would be impactful. So there's a lot of information in the America First trade policy. We can happily provide a link. There's way more than we could possibly cover in the time today. So if you're interested in more information about that, we can send out a link.
Next slide, Libby. So let's review a case study of kind of the one more slide, please. Just a case study of kind of how that nothing is off the table approach has existed. So I kind of hit the news about a week and a half ago that the country Colombia was refusing a plane of immigrants being sent back, and some tariff threats were made pretty immediately to the country to basically say, hey, if you're not going to follow what our agenda is, then this is what's going to happen effectively within the next day or two. So when Chance mentions a nothing is off the table approach, essentially how we're reading this is no country around the world is going to be exempt from potential tariff threats if there is a deemed deviation off of a proposed agenda. And I think what we saw on the Colombia side of things is that these economically smaller countries like Colombia are going to be more susceptible to kind of a hardline approach versus Canada and Mexico earlier this week. While the United States economy is larger than both of those two, they have the economic power to potentially fight back against those. China certainly is of that size. And so, what this kind of taught us is the administration is not afraid to flex its muscles against much smaller countries to get what they want in agendas outside of trade imbalance. In this case, it was immigration. What kind of remains to be seen, what I felt like we did not learn enough of this past week, was how seriously the administration and foreign administrations as well of economies of size are able to kind of compete against each other, and how far they're willing to go with the tariff policy in order to get that done. So all, with the exception being China, Canada, Mexico, and the United States, all kind of reached an agreement to avoid it. So we didn't kind of broach that. But at the end of the day, it was a 30-day agreement. So we're not exactly sure what changes might unfold if there's a situation where the countries can't agree on terms in the future.
Yeah, I think it's important to note on that topic. Historically, tariffs were a trade negotiation, but the current administration feels like it can be used as a negotiation tactic to get what we want. And we were talking earlier, and Jack mentioned leveraging our buying power as the largest consumer in the world. Leveraging our buying power is a great negotiation tactic, or as we've seen, can be effective, whether you like it or not. And then the other thing is, in addition to that, it's also a revenue generator. And we all know about the trade deficit we have, and we're spending more than we are bringing in taxes and things like that. So it's another impactful thing that this administration has shown that they'll use it for. So what do we know about what's happened in the last couple of days? As many people I'm sure know, President Trump issued 3 executive orders using the IEEPA, or the International Emergency Economic Powers Act. The IEEPA mechanism allows the immediate impact of these tariffs. There's no review process. While there are questions about the legality, as of this morning, I hadn't seen anything. And my friend Brian Murphy is a lawyer, and he mentioned he had not seen any legal challenges to this. But there are some questions about that, and he may have to prove in court that all of the products correlate to the national emergency, which is what the IEPA gives him authority to do these immediately on. But 25% tariffs announced for all products of Mexico and Canada. As Jack mentioned, both of those were paused. There was an exception on energy resources or oil from Canada. Not paused is 10% tariff on all products from China and Hong Kong. These are in addition to anything that he did in his first administration or that the Biden administration kept in place or increased. China has announced some retaliatory tariffs. Yesterday, they announced some targeted tariffs. They've got 15% on coal and liquefied natural gas, and then 10% on crude oil, farm equipment, some automotive. It was very targeted. I believe they may have even specified specific manufacturers on that part. And then they also introduced some additional restrictions on export controls. So a lot of the raw materials and materials we use to make certain things, such as chips, they've put some export restrictions on. So it's not just duties and tariffs on stuff that we sell to China, but also things that we buy from China. It says here the de minimis program suspended from China. Brian mentioned in the comments, we did get confirmation. It is only China that the de minimis program is suspended for right now. It's believed that Mexico and Canada, it is still an active policy, but the majority of the de minimis program, and we'll talk more about de minimis and what that means a little later on the slide, but there was over 1 billion packages that came from China under this policy in 2024. So curbing just Chinese de minimis imports is going to significantly impact the stated cause of using IEPA, which is the illegal importation of drugs like fentanyl and then illegal immigrants.
Yeah, I think it seems like de minimis just today, even this morning, is getting the conversation nationally that I felt like it deserved a couple days ago when this came out. You're starting to see companies like DHL and even the United States Postal Service basically backing out of shipping these types of orders because they're not sure how they can handle the entry process now that it's going from Type 86 de minimis entry that doesn't require any kind of formal entry process to oh man, we've got 1 billion entries that are happening this year that now each need their own dedicated process to them that would typically be handled by a U.S. Customs broker. So starting to see more attention on that now. Really, for the people on this call, I think the de minimis program was ultimately hurting you guys as businesses. Anytime somebody in the United States can purchase something directly from China that comes in with no duty, and you guys have to import stuff in bulk that is subject to duty, even if it's the same product, that type of program is not beneficial to United States importers. And so from my perspective, it is a good thing that something like that is happening. Now, as consumers, as somebody that is an individual who, I'm not a big buyer on sites like Temu or Shein or Alibaba, but I've purchased 1 or 2 things on there. As a consumer, those types of things, A, are going to take longer, and B, are very likely going to cost more because somebody, whether it's you as the consumer or the shipper at origin, is going to have to act as the importer and pay duties and taxes on that. So depending on how you look at it, we're on this call because we're approaching it from a perspective of the businesses that we work for. So for the businesses that are conducting import business, the de minimis elimination from China should ultimately be a good thing for competitiveness.
Yeah, one impact that we wanted to highlight is that all of these packages that previously didn't have a formal customs entry will now have a formal customs entry. Now they'll be typically consolidated and come in, bulk, as Jack mentioned. So it's not going to double or quadruple the entries, but it is going to increase the formal entries, which is going to put a burden on U.S. Customs. So I just think it's important to note that whether or not the U.S. Customs infrastructure can handle the influx of additional entries or not, it remains to be seen. But so there could be some challenges with this. Jack and I agree. We think it's a beneficial policy for U.S. companies, an inconvenience for U.S. consumers. But as a company, there may be an inconvenience there too if customs can't handle the additional volume.
And this is definitely a conversation that is taking place very much today. A lot of news going back and forth as early as last night, and then reversed this morning regarding whether USPS would handle these types of packages. And so, just definitely something to keep an eye on as we move forward.
Yeah, I think you both make some great points on that. Again, it kind of comes down to the individual consumer, their costs and what that means for them versus what it means for American businesses, and those don't always align. So I think you make some great points there. We're going to move into some questions. Many of you submitted questions beforehand, and I really thank you for that. So we have some great questions in the PowerPoint and then some other ones that Riley and I are going to ask. And as always, if you have your own questions, leave them in the chat and we'll make sure to address those as well. So we're going to start off with a question for Jack, and this is, how will new tariff policies impact emerging markets?
Yeah, so if we're treating the term emerging markets as in, kind of smaller countries or more of like the non-traditional mega exporters around the globe, then these tariff policies, at least the ones that have been, published so far, would appear to be beneficial to emerging markets. Now, I'll get back to that in a second. The exception to that is kind of the way that the Trump administration targeted the country of Colombia, which I would consider an emerging market. I think everybody kind of has to have their head on a swivel here globally in terms of other countries, and you guys as importers that import from these countries potentially. Because as Chance mentioned in the America First policy that's been published, they're taking a wholesale review of this. And the idea seemingly is that anybody that is going outside the bounds of what the administration deems acceptable is going to be subject to some kind of quick action. But in general, based on the kind of the three major executive orders that have gone out to restrict or add tariffs to China, Canada, and Mexico, those are by far the three largest trading partners that the United States has. And then the language that's being talked about with the European Union, that would be the next largest, exporter to the United States. So being that emerging markets are not those, that's why they are emerging markets. You'd imagine that any percentage of volume that moves away from those more traditional sellers to the United States is going to benefit countries that I would consider emerging markets, like for perhaps Thailand or Cambodia, Vietnam, European countries that maybe don't do as much trade with the United States. So kind of a two-sided answer. I think there's an element of nobody's safe here, but in general, tariffs targeting China, Canada, and Mexico and the United States are going to benefit just about everybody else.
Yeah, theoretically, I less out of China is opportunity for the rest of the world, right? Mm-hmm. So theoretically, as long as those emerging markets are in line with the administration's policies, it's opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That was an amazing question. It came from Chanella. She's taking credit for it in the comments. Way to go. We really appreciate that. I think I have some other good questions from you in here as well. So let's move on to our next question. This will be for Chance. And it's, do we foresee any unexpected shifts in global trade routes for 2025?
So Jack mentioned this when we were preparing for this. If there's one thing we know for sure, it is expect the unexpected. Now, more specifically than that, if if the tariffs specific, just talk about China for a moment. If the tariffs have the impact that they're designed for, that's going to reduce the amount of trade coming out of China to the U.S. Right now, that is the trade lane with the most capacity. So as the demand decreases, ocean carriers, airlines, freight, all cargo airlines specifically, the passenger airlines are still going to fly there if people have a demand to fly to these countries. But when you talk about cargo airlines and steamship lines, they're not going to leave their capacity on a trade lane that doesn't have demand there. So if the tariffs have the impact that they want and drive less trade with China, then capacity is going to shift. And the next biggest trade lane is China to Europe. And there's a capacity crunch for the most part there a lot of times, especially with the Suez Canal situation and going down around the Cape of Good Hope. So we do anticipate if the tariffs have the impact that they're desired to have, there could be shifts and changes, but it's going to take a while. The demand is still significant out of China, and it takes time to change your supply chain.
Yeah, if anything, I would probably anticipate with a lot of new vessels coming online with steamship lines, maybe just introducing those vessels into more Southeast Asian ports beyond China, rather than introducing them straight into the Shanghai to Los Angeles major lane. So
that's a great point. It could positively impact too, because there aren't very many direct services, meaning they don't transship in another port out of the smaller Southeast Asian countries. There's a few. Vietnam has a couple direct options, but most of the rest of them outside of Singapore don't really have direct sailing options. It all goes via another port. So maybe the capacity shifts to more direct sailings. The shifting alliances with the steamship lines is also going to play a part here. It's not just the tariffs that are going to change some things. So I think those are all. There's a lot of unknowns out there, but like we said, expect the unexpected.
Yeah, in this environment, the only constant is change. That's for sure. So just got to be prepared for all outcomes. Our next question, we'll go back to Jack for this one, is what can shippers do to prepare for tariffs being used as a political weapon?
Yeah. So we discussed this earlier. My go-to answer is always diversification, with the understanding that that's not always possible in large scale, but it should be possible for considering kind of the direction things are headed. I think it's clear that things that, like Chance mentioned on the last slide, the expect the unexpected. We've kind of been in that mindset for the past 5 years since COVID. We've seen the ups and downs of the market. We've seen, global pandemic, all sorts of different, two different leadership styles in the United States in terms of how they approach foreign policy. So you're going to need to be diversified. We've got, just for example, a client that came to us earlier, a client that may be on the call today, came to us earlier today that notified us that they're going to be shipping from the country of Georgia here coming up in 2025. This is a customer that already ships from China, Vietnam, Honduras, Bangladesh, a number of countries that I'm forgetting right now, but that is what a well-rounded supply chain looks like. Now they're in the textile industry. That's obviously a bit easier in textiles than it is for, say, widgets or something that's more highly specified or like highly technological, which is going to skew mostly to Asia. But that's the kind of mindset that you guys are going to need to be into. Is if all of my suppliers are in China, I'm going to have to figure out a way to get into Vietnam or into Thailand. Not to say that those countries are never going to be targeted by this administration, but spreading around your chances and making sure that you've got strong partnerships in an instance of maybe a more scorched earth policy than we've seen so far is going to be in your best interest. So those conversations obviously need to be happening now or yesterday. But it's definitely something that should be top of mind right now for those of us that are higher dependent on products from China than we should be.
If there's one thing you can do, it's have a plan. We've seen a bunch of people move their supply chains and maybe now they're importing from China and Mexico, but now Mexico's possibly being impacted. That was from the first administration, right? That's driven Mexico to overtake China as our number one trading partner. The situation with Colombia, I don't think anybody expected Colombia trade lanes to be impacted, right? So just have a plan. If you are a solely China sourcing company, definitely want to diversify. If you already have diversification plans or things in place, just be ready to change those too. And have a plan. Talk to your trade attorneys. Make sure that you understand the implications of, what are the tariff rates for your commodities if from a different country, and then talk to your freight forwarders and logistics providers to understand the differences in transit times, maybe cost of the different origins. So just have a plan, even if you don't think you immediately need to change your supply chain.
And one more thing I'll add, those are great points, Chance. One more thing I'll add that we mentioned earlier, but is worth mentioning again here are those price elasticity clauses in your either product catalogs, or basically be having these conversations with your customers. Different industries are different. I'm not going to pretend to understand, what your contracts with your customers look like. But, it is helpful that this stuff is making the news. It's not going to catch many of your customers by surprise that there's, threats of tariffs coming into the United States, but making sure that you guys it gives you an opportunity to work in partnership with them of like, let's figure out language that makes sure we're benefiting each other. And so that neither of us are left out in the dark here if something unexpected changes. Those are important conversations to be having now and continue to have into the future, because we don't see this environment of expect the unexpected to change anytime soon.
Yeah, I think those are great points. And I think even the example that you gave, Jack, kind of goes back to the previous question about emerging markets. Like our client who's sourcing things from Georgia now might not have been an opportunity that had happened if we weren't in the situation that we're in. So two sides to every coin, just being transparent with your clients and your suppliers and making sure that you have those plans in place. Our next question, how do the tariffs with Mexico and Canada affect or work with the USMCA? And I'll let Chance take point on this one.
That's a pretty simple one. Once the pause is over, if they go into effect, they are what's considered ad valorem. So they are on top of anything that's already in place. Just because it's duty-free with USMCA, it will not be exempted from this. Now, the original executive orders didn't include any exemptions at all. Some of that's been changed, and with more time to actually implement the plan, there's likely to be some exclusions involved with that. I have to imagine that the U.S. automakers are going to be lobbying heavily for some exemptions because they are so intertwined just in North America. I have to imagine that there's going to be some exclusions there for the automakers, but until we see the official guidances, we won't really know. But the simple answer is the impact, they will be on top of anything that's already being levied against any of those products.
Yeah, that's great insight. I really appreciate you guys sharing on those. I'm going to take the presentation down for a second. I have some other questions that were submitted that were not in the presentation. And before we get into those, just want to mention again, if you have anything that pops into your mind during any of this, please put it in the comments and we'll make sure to get to it. So the first question that I have here, I'm actually going to shoot over to Riley. It's more of a domestic question. Assuming that tariffs are expected to increase prices at the local level, will this affect shipments that need to ship inside the United States? For example, will the carrier price go up if items are shipped from California to Florida?
Well, I'm still trying to digest everything we just heard. That was good stuff. No, that is a kind of a moving target, that question right there. I'll be looking at a couple of key indicators before answering that question. I think we just need to see some things unfold first. The first one is freight volumes. If these tariffs go into place, that's going to decrease freight volumes throughout the United States. And with less freight volume comes lower prices for the shipper. So that could send rates south. The other thing to look for is retaliation from these countries. So if fuel is impacted and fuel goes up, that's obviously going to send rates up. There's just a lot of things that can happen between now and hopefully when things stabilize a little bit. But the main thing is freight volumes and any retaliation are the two things that I would keep an eye on. But yeah, it's this recovery mode we're in has been deeply impacted with all of this chatter the last couple of weeks. And we're getting a lot of those questions. The only thing we can do is monitor the situation and just stay up to date on it. So those are the two main things that I'll be looking for in the coming weeks and months.
Yeah. When you're talking about the largest economy in the world and their three largest trade partners, potentially, just kind of changing the trade environment, there's a lot of dominoes that are going to fall.
Right.
That'll be one of them, but it'll be, further downstream.
If I could tell you what a truck was going to cost a month from now from California to Florida, I wouldn't be sitting here. I'd be sitting on my yacht somewhere for sure.
You don't have one already?
No, we're in a freight recession, bro. Come on.
Yeah, great stuff. It kind of just, all goes back to what Chance was saying. You just have to have a plan, and it doesn't just affect international shippers, even if you're solely a domestic shipper, just having those plans in place and being sure to monitor the situation or to be connected with people who are closely monitoring the situation.
Yeah, I think it's a really great time to point out just how interconnected things are. Riley touched on the volumes. A significant amount of the goods that moved domestically within the U.S. were either imported or exported as the final leg or first leg of that international transit. And so, on one hand, less imports would mean less volume in the market, but at the same time, if the America First policy has its intended impact, there will be eventually more manufacturing. So therefore, those goods that aren't being imported would still be moving domestically. So, while it may drive volumes down to start, hopefully eventually, if the impact is what is intended, then those will come back. So it's a moving target, I think, is the perfect analogy.
Yeah, we got a great question in the comments from Michael Dickerson. If a shipment left China on January 31st and lands in LA on February 25th, would it be subject to these tariffs?
The answer is no. As the language is currently written right now, that particular instance would not be subject to the additional 10% duties from China. The letter of the language right now states that anything that departed in the month of January, essentially, from the final vessel that it was loaded to before getting to the United States, then those would not be subject to additional tariffs. And that was essentially done to not penalize people or companies that had imported prior to this kind of announcement being made. And that, like we said, that could potentially change too, but I'm not necessarily anticipating it imminently.
The ocean freight's kind of cut and dry because it's longer transit times. But what about air freight? If let's say it departed China on Friday the 31st, but stopped in Frankfurt and didn't depart Frankfurt until today, is that still going to be
my interpretation of what was written is that it depends on the final transit leg to the United States. So if it actually gets off of an airplane in Frankfurt and loads that new airplane after February 1st to come to the United States, then that would be subject to the additional 10%. That's whatever vessel, and if we're thinking vessels as in airplanes or boats, whatever vessel is coming to the United States, that needed to have departed prior to the start of February.
So it's more tied to the last leg than the first date of export or date of departure.
Correct. That was my interpretation of the executive order.
I also understand there's a little bit of vagueness with bonded and FTZ, whether they're going to consider the original date of export versus the date that it was entered into the bonded warehouse or FTZ. Do you have any input on that?
I don't have FTZ. FTC is I'm going to pull my refer to your lawyer card, refer to your trade attorney card. Just not something that I feel comfortable wading into right now in terms of the impact on these tariffs.
Yeah, Brian makes a good point in the comments. He says, note that goods on the water provision is before February 1st Eastern Standard Time. So good clarification there. Thank you, Brian.
Thanks, Brian.
I have another question here. I'll give this one to Jack. If the original business is an international business and has established expanding their company inside the United States, will there still be a tariff placed on that business? For example, IKEA was created in Sweden, but it has expanded its business into the United States. Will there be tariffs placed on those sorts of businesses?
Yeah. So the point to be clear about there is that tariffs are implemented on products, not on businesses. So it depends on where that product has an origin or what the country of origin is of that product. So if, an American company has a facility in China, and that facility in China manufactures a good and ships it to the United States, that is a good of China. And so it does not depend on what the headquarters of the company is. It depends on where the product itself was created. So in this particular example, no, that the goods, just because they have a presence or like a high presence in the United States, doesn't exempt them from paying a tariff on a good made in a foreign country.
Something to note there is we saw a lot of suppliers or people with the first Trump administration and the actions there. A lot of trade shifted to Vietnam, other Southeastern Asia countries, and Mexico, which we talked about a little bit earlier. But it's widely believed that many of those companies are still Chinese owned, either wholly or in part. And so there is conversations around targeting the ownership, but that's just all of that is hearsay and just being talked about. There's nothing in place. I think it would be really hard to enforce personally, but that we've seen that's not necessarily something that goes into the decision making when these things are being introduced. So just something to be cognizant of in the future. If your supplier says, oh, we have a plant in Mexico now. If they still own that plant, there could be some action in the future.
Speculative for sure, but good. Yeah, definitely a good point.
Amazing. I have one last question here. I'll give this to Chance. It says, China was mentioned to have an additional 10% tariff increase. Will Taiwan be considered as part of the governance of China and be affected as well?
No, is the simple answer there. While China considers Taiwan to be part of the PRC, the United States recognizes them as their own sovereign entity, unlike Hong Kong, where we do, I believe the official, United States policy is that they are their own entity, but Hong Kong has been rolled into the China policy with these tariffs. So it seems that there has been a shift there, and that Hong Kong is now being treated the same as China, but Taiwan has not been. And I don't think they will be, just because of their influence in the microchips industry. They're a very, very important part of that, and that's been a very, very important part of not only this administration, but the last administration's approach to China is restricting their access to chips.
Yeah, those are great points. Those are all the questions that I have. We'll give it a couple more minutes if anyone has any last minute thoughts they want to throw into the chat. Oh, perfect. I already have one from Mona Daniels. Does the China retaliatory tariffs also apply to Hong Kong? That's a great question.
That is a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. Do you, Jack?
I don't know the answer. If I were to assume, which is a dangerous game, obviously, on a podcast that's being live streamed. But if I were to assume, I would assume yes. That if China's implementing a retaliatory tariff, it would make the most sense to me to make it kind of mirror at least the countries that were being tariffed. So that is a great question, Mona. We can check into that for you and get back to you on it.
And just topically, just having seen the actions China took in Hong Kong with protests and things like that coming out of COVID, it's pretty obvious that China is truly in control of the Hong Kong government, even if it's supposed to be considered a special autonomous region. So I agree with Jack. I think it probably would, but we just don't know for sure. Although Brian seems to think it does.
Perfect. And I do believe Brian's a lawyer, so I'm going to believe him in this instance. Mona, if we hear differently, we'll definitely reach out and let you know, though. That is a great question. That
does bring up a good point. We're not lawyers, so none of this should be taken as legally binding advice. These are our opinions and meant to be helpful, but not anything. This is not legal advice.
Yes, important distinction. Brian, further clarified, products of China in Hong Kong are subject to new tariffs. I'm always happy to have more experts chime in. That's why we do these things. Really appreciate the insight there. If anybody else has any questions, now's your chance to throw them into the chat, and we'll have Jack and Chance give it their best go.
So while we're waiting to see if there's any additional questions, I think important to kind of summarize by saying, what we're saying today may not be true tomorrow. And I think in the instance of China specifically, President Xi Jinping and President Trump were scheduled to talk yesterday. That talk got pushed back to an undetermined time, but totally possible that they come out of whatever discussion that they have over the next couple of weeks and determine that these tariffs can be wiped off, and that could be done either retroactively or by a certain date, which is why it's important you guys are staying in touch with the people that are keeping track of this super closely. There's a couple of them on this call, trade attorneys. If you guys have one, if you don't have a trade attorney and you want some references, we can certainly do that. But stuff like this is going to pop in and out, and so we can be your go-to for that type of information.
That's a great point. We didn't really touch on this earlier, but the executive orders have verbiage in there that specifies that the administration can escalate the tariffs they've already levied on the target countries if there is retaliation. So, we didn't see anything since yesterday in China's announcement, but that could be coming. We could see the tend to get increased because China retaliated. So just to your point, Jack, it's super critical to keep an eye on it. I got to steal one from Brian again. We were on a call last week and he said, if your business is in the news every day, you should be paying attention. And if you're in international trade, your business has been in the news every day. So, just stay aware. And if you need resources, if you want to know where we get our information from, shoot us a message. We're happy to share. We try to put stuff out on LinkedIn and other outlets, but if you want to go straight to the source, let us know. We're happy to share our sources. None of this is proprietary.
Yeah, and kind of build off that best way. Really, we focus a lot on education, not only internally, but for our clients and anyone in the industry. So keeping up with our LinkedIn page is going to be a great way to keep up with the news. As things come out, we'll have more events like this where we just sit down and answer questions and talk through it all. Like they mentioned, not lawyers. However, we do have some people who know a thing or two about a thing or two, and always just happy to give our opinions as a licensed custom broker and freight forwarder. This is a crazy time. Jack mentioned as we were prepping for this event that trying to make a presentation for this information proved to be very difficult as it was changing literally by the hour. So it's just at the utmost important to keep up with what's happening, and we're happy to be a source of that for you.
I think that's a great opportunity to just say thanks to Libby for all your work and wrangling cats and getting everything organized for this.
Well, if nobody has any further questions. Having just a little bit of technical difficulties on our side with the Wi-Fi cutting in and out, but
I stop pressing buttons over
I know
here.
Riley's back there unplugging and plugging in the connectors. It's causing all sorts of issues. So we'll go ahead and wrap this up today. As always, if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out. I'll be sending a follow-up email with this presentation, and these recordings will live on our LinkedIn forever if you ever want to go back and watch it. We really appreciate everybody who took the time to chat with us today, everyone who sent in pre-questions before. This has just been a really good experience for us all here, and we hope that you were able to get something out of it. All right. Well, we will see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks for watching.